when I interview a customer, I will make notes when I see them feeling frustrated, and I will make note when I see them really joyous and motivated. People will ask, why are you doing that? Why not just making notes throughout? What it allows you to do is really focus on the customer when they're speaking to you so that you can then ask them prompt questions. You have an audience internally, your sales team, your customer success team, your product team, your solutions engineers. They are speaking to customers day in, day out. They understand what they're trying to achieve. So use that audience. Always think you've not achieved your ceiling, you've not got to the ceiling, because there's always room to learn.
Hey, welcome to the Message Market Fit podcast. I'm your host, Chris Silvestri, and if you're new here, this is a show where I chat with B2B SaaS folks in marketing, product, growth, and founders about how they join the conversation already happening in their customers' minds. We dive deep into their thinking, their systems, and their playbooks to see how they empathize with their audience and speak to them in a way that resonates, so they're compelled to take action. Join us and learn how you too can shape your messaging strategy and write copy that truly resonates and differentiates you. I'm super excited about my guest today, Nizam Yusuf. Nizam is Director of Product Marketing at Ocelot, a two-way texting and chatbot SaaS for student outreach and support. In this episode, we chat about Nizam's evolution from content marketing to product marketing, the importance of empathy when creating product messaging, Nizam's step-by-step process for achieving message market fit, and how he leverages AI tools to augment and support his work as a product marketer. Let's dive right in. Hey Nizam, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? And first of all, it's nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation to take part in your podcast.
No worries. I'm honored. You're such a great experience that I'm being keen to talk about. So I would say let's start with some of your background. I know that you started in content. You also did some social media marketing, right? Can you walk us a bit through your evolution?
Yes, early in my career, I started off in content marketing, digital marketing, social media marketing. As a marketing assistant, you have to pay your dues and you end up touching based on all different areas of marketing. For me, it was all three. I worked within the language industry at one point, and I remember having to manage multiple Twitter accounts in different languages, in French, Italian, German, Spanish. I didn't speak any of them, but luckily I worked for a translation and localization company. So I had the resource with help me look at that.
And we
So
still
I
didn't
started
have
off.
ChatGPT, right?
Oh, it was a long time ago. Now you're asking
Yeah,
me my
that
age. I'm
would
not
have
going to go
been
through that point.
handy.
Yeah, at that point, people never discussed AI, and the closest it got to AI was when you put words onto the computer and this robot started speaking, and everyone just laughed because it was very robotic. But yeah, at that point, there was no such thing as ChatGPT. And even then, Google Translate wasn't the best. You put something in and it'll tell you something totally different. So yeah, it was at that time that I was making a decision as to what I wanted to do in terms of what focus I wanted in marketing. And content marketing was always a calling. I'll give you an example. Very early on when I was a student, I always used to have the problem of reducing word count rather than meeting word count, because I was like, wait a second, I've written too much content here. I need to reduce the content if I'm going to hand this course working. So I always knew I was destined for that space, but it was my calling. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed understanding what I'm talking about, understanding the topics, really delving deep into them. So yeah, I started off in content marketing as a content marketing assistant, quickly moved on to content marketing exec. And around 7 years later, I was leading a team of around 4 content marketers, really working with them to bring out their core strengths. And also just really understanding when you get to that point where you become a specialist in what you do. And at what point I was, rather than putting myself across as a content marketer, I was positioning myself as a writer for a particular industry because it would resonate with the audience I'm speaking to. They were more open with me when I said I was a writer rather than having marketing in my title. So I even got to that point where I was writing about finance, treasury, payments, etc. So it was I found my feet in writing. I found my feet in content marketing. And yeah, it was a journey that was interesting. Yeah.
It's super interesting when you mentioned that people didn't really trust the term marketing. That to me, the way that you adapted is also an example of understanding where people come from, like their own perspective, right? You put yourself in their shoes and try to understand, okay, if I define myself this way, they're gonna be more receptive to what I do. Do you think it's because the term marketing has a negative connotation, or what else?
I think it's more you're looking to, when you're speaking to someone, they want to feel comfortable that you're having a conversation with them to understand their needs and you're trying to understand what they're really about. And I sometimes think that when you're speaking to certain audiences, they feel a bit, they'll hold back. So when I dropped the marketing title when speaking to, for example, CFOs, I always found they were a lot more open because
Yeah.
I was just asking them deep questions as to what is that pain point? And then when they start talking about that pain point, why? And I really get to the bottom of it. So they realize that I'm not there to take what they're saying and just create maybe adverts or
Yeah.
something like that out of it. What I'm really looking at is to understand them. And when you start doing that, the customer, the audience that you're speaking to feels a lot more comfortable. So it was when it really supported myself in content marketing, and it helped me because I was already having a level of having been in the finance space, for example, for coming up to 5 years. I already had a great understanding of the industry, so I could openly converse with them at their level.
Yeah, it makes sense. It reminds me, if you've ever heard Ramit Sethi, he's a blogger, online business guy. Anyway, he used to tell this story where he used to define himself at parties or wherever he met people as a writer, but then people thought that it was just, I don't know, some random freelancer, while he had actually written books. So he started defining himself as author, which gave him a bit more of a prominence, right? So it's a personal positioning. So
Y-
I like the way that you used it yourself. It's interesting. When
Yeah,
it
it's
comes
just
to
making the other person comfortable.
yeah,
That's what I
exactly.
find.
Yeah. It's a very good perspective. When it comes to the distinction between content and copywriting, right? I find that there's a big misconception there. Even some of my clients or potential clients, people who look for my services, a lot of them, when they talk about website copy, they talk about website content, right? So they don't have a really clear distinction between what educational content is and what sales copy is. Do you see that's the case for you as well in the space? Is that the
Yeah.
disconnect?
Yeah. In my time when I spent as a content marketer, when I used to interview content marketers, when I was hiring content marketers, one of my questions I would always ask is, what is the difference between a content marketer and a copywriter?
Uh,
And the reason why I would always ask that is, for me, a content marketer would delve deep into understanding the audience that they're writing about or writing for that audience. They would understand how you're meeting a need. You would get into the weeds of things of what's the data behind it, what are some of the proof points that you can pull. And I always found that content marketers, when I was hiring content marketers, I was always look at them becoming experts in that field. Whereas I always find that from a copywriting perspective, if you need the support of a copywriter, they can support you in one-off projects or continuously working on certain types of content or copy. But they will never become an expert in that field because they're adapting. So there's a
yeah.
space for both in marketing. And I think that's why I always found a difference. And I would say, yeah, from a perspective, a content marketer gets deep and understanding of that audience, really delves deep into it. Whereas a copywriter is, I would say, for the here and now. And if you needed to write a press release or you needed a blog post that addresses a certain issue, I would, as a content marketer, still have to create a brief for that copywriter. Whereas for a content writer, I would leave them to it because I understand
Yeah.
their strengths and what they do, that you can always trust that they'll be able to deliver a deep and meaningful piece of content.
Yeah. And that's typically, I think, because content marketers, content writers, they specialize in a niche as well. Maybe they start writing for your product only, so they immerse themselves and they basically become intimate almost with the
Yeah,
market and with the audience, right?
yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, yeah.
When it comes to product marketing, then, how would you recommend product marketers interface with content writers then, and become better themselves at content writing, maybe?
I guess from my perspective, I moved from content marketing into product marketing. I have the advantage of knowing both sides, and one of the main reasons why I moved from content marketing to product marketing was I realized that there was elements that I was already doing. For example, I was really understanding the customer. I was trying to understand their pain points. I was talking to them. I was listening to what they're saying. I was listening to how they felt frustration, but also motivation. And you're trying to pick that out. And as a product marketer, I felt like moving into product marketing, I felt like there was an alignment where you look at their pain points, you look at what they're trying to achieve, you look at their what they're trying to achieve in the workplace as well as professionally about motivations. So I realized that there was a synergy. And I think if you're a product marketer working with content marketers, I would always lean on those two elements, which is you understand from their perspective what they're trying to achieve and from your perspective as well, and create that alignment. Because once you start speaking that same language with your content marketer, then it really resonates. Yeah. And I think it helps that both of you understand messaging and how to go about messaging as well.
Yeah. Do you think for a product marketer, in order to maybe instruct or guide a content writer, they first need to do the writing themselves to understand it and then to be able to move it on? Or
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I do, and I think a lot of other product marketers do, is they will go through a whole process of understanding the pain points. They'll understand what their audience is trying to achieve, what your buyers and your users are trying to achieve. They will look at how you can resolve that pain point, how you can help them achieve their goals, and then start creating messaging around it. So from a product marketing perspective, I always feel like you need to deliver a messaging framework where you give a high level overview of the titles, the sub content, the elevator pitch, a big bulk of messaging that resonates with your audience. And if you're marketing to different personas, even looking at different personas and how you resolve and position to each of those different personas. Because once you've created that framework, you can explain that and take it to your content team, take it to your marketing team, and then talk through it, help them understand it, and then it will provide them the framework from which to then create further content. For example, if I'm talking to a particular audience and I've dealt on a certain pain point, then a content marketer can look at that particular pain point and have a starting point from where to begin writing about that audience and that particular topic. So it is really supportive from that perspective. And what it then allows you to do is you can use that that strategic messaging framework in multiple locations. For example, you could use it as a product marketer to create sales enablement content. But if your content marketer is using it to create blog content, there'll be messaging that aligns. And from an audience perspective, they'll absorb your content online, they'll watch your videos, they'll see you at events, they'll see that message. And then when you pass them a sales enablement piece of content or your slide deck, that message will continue. So it creates that fit and it ensures that you have a consistency of messaging going throughout your whole funnel and the full journey of the customer takes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
this
think
is
that alignment is important.
Yeah, I was saying this is how you avoid those silos between departments on messaging, right?
Yeah. And again, from my understanding of product marketing and having spoke to multiple product marketers, some majority of them report into marketing. The next big percentage report into product. Some report even into sales and different other departments, and some are standalone departments. But as a product marketer, one of the most important things you need to do is work cross-functionally. So it's important that you are always speaking to your teams, your marketing team, your sales team, your customer success team, because you ensure that you're aligning with them and their needs, but also making sure that they understand what you're bringing to them is going to help them as well.
I'm super curious, and this is almost a selfish curiosity, but I'm seeing in a lot of companies it's a bit different. So, in my case, as a copywriter, a conversion copywriter, so web copy, I might work with the VP of marketing once or the product marketer another time, sometimes even with the head of growth. So, I'm wondering what patterns are you seeing? Who decides that, okay, we need to hire a copywriter for this? Or we can do it internally. what does it look like on your perspective?
From my perspective, it usually depends on the requirement, whether that you've got the resource internally or whether you're looking from a perspective of a different way of writing. I've used external copywriters and worked with external copywriters for various different reasons. For example, if I needed something and I didn't have the resource internally, I can go externally to someone I know who I've worked with or understands how I want the content to be presented. But then there are occasions where there are specialists who will come from from an outsider's perspective and make you think differently. And it's really important that you do that, because what can happen is you can get stuck in a silo yourself within an organization. So it's always important to, you know, get get an outsider's perspective, get their professional opinion, where they can maybe provide a different perspective and pick out different things that you may have missed, because you've always had the inkling that this is the problem. Whereas when they speak to a customer, they may hear something different. So it's always important to use it differently for different requirements.
Yeah. When that happens, do you typically share your research with them, or do you trust them, or do you actually want them to do their own research and come back with the results?
Again, based on requirements, I've worked with people where we've created a full survey, we've gone and understood the audience, we've interviewed customers, prospects, our buyers, our users, and got to the bottom of different views and then created content, and they've gone and created content. But then on occasions when you know that you're trying to put across a certain message, for example, you have proof points that you want to talk about that are going to be valuable to your audience, and you know that you've got this data that you really want to talk about, then obviously you would start with that data and help the writer understand this is what it resolves, this is what we want, why it's really important, and to make sure that they can portray that in the content that they write. So you look at it from different perspectives of what your need is. You're also based on timescale. If you need something quicker, you will have it ready and the brief ready. Whereas for others, if it's a longer term project, usually it's going to be more strategic. Then you'll spend a bit more time, and you need to make sure you allow for that time and don't rush the writer in that perspective.
Yeah, I love it. This is a very good framework, I think, for leaders to understand how to delegate. I think especially these tasks that are very high touch, very strategic, it's super important.
Yeah, I just don't think you can rush people, especially if you're putting someone under pressure, especially writers. You will find that they'll need their space, they'll need a time to think, and you need to give them the opportunity. Obviously, set yourself deadlines as to when you can meet that need and work with your writers, and they will work with you. And because they'll probably be, if you're working with an external writer, they'll have other people that they're working with as well. So it's always important to have that deadline and set a date of when you want to achieve your own goal from an internal audience perspective. And most writers will help you achieve that goal.
Yeah, and it's important, like for myself, for example, super important that when I start learning about a market, about customers, different products, if I don't immerse myself, for example, in reviews or in demo sales calls, I don't get that intuitive feeling that I was talking about. And as you said, it's important for writers to take their time. I wish a lot of people understood that better.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's move to message market fit. First, how would you define message market fit?
For me, I always look at it from the perspective that for message market fit, you want customer market fit. And in order to achieve customer market fit, you need to understand what your customer is looking to achieve. What are their things they're trying to resolve? What are their longer term and short term objectives? And then how, as an organization, can your product or service help them achieve that particular goal, overcome those pains, overcome those problems? And when you do that, you want to make sure you create value-based messaging, and rather than just focusing on the product. So I think that's when you will start seeing that customer market fit with message market fit. Yeah, I have to focus on the customer's needs rather than the product features, because it will enhance your messaging.
Yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense. You have a very specific process that I know because we talked about it before for reaching message market
Yeah.
fit. Can you walk us through the main steps of how it works?
Yeah. So what I always say to product marketers, and I've helped product marketers and content marketers move into product marketing and other people start their career in product marketing. And I always say, find your own process that works for you. And it won't come overnight. You'll work on it, you'll work on it, you'll work on it, and you'll suddenly feel like you've got a set process which you can rinse and repeat. And you will always be learning, but you'll be able to use that. And for me, it starts with a high level overview of what you're trying to achieve. And in order to do that, I always try and look at creating a lean canvas. In a lean canvas, you look at the problems, you look at the solution, you look at the features, you look at the audience, and then you'll also take a business perspective of how is it going to help your organization? How are you going to take this to market? What are the campaigns going to be? Who is your audience to begin with, and who is your audience going forward? It'll give you perspectives of what you want to focus on. So I always start with that because it gives you like a 10,000-foot bird's eye view of what you're trying to achieve. As I said, in a lean canvas, you'll start with the pain point. And then when you do that, the next step of that is to move into buyer personas. And I always look at buyer personas and user personas. So you're trying to understand the challenges that they've got. You're trying to understand what they're trying to achieve, what's their job role, what's their responsibilities. And then also you want to look at certain common objections that you're going to face as an organization when you reach out to that audience with your particular product. So you want to look into that and build that out. And then finally, one of the most important elements to me is what a lot of people use as well is their value proposition canvas. I think it's a fantastic tool because it allows you to really delve deep into what the customer values and then how you position for what the customer is trying to achieve. So what are their job roles? What are their jobs to be done? What are their pain points? What are they trying to achieve? The profile will tell you that information. Then when you start positioning your product against it, you can then say, how can you relieve that pain? How can you help them achieve that gain? And then you can list out what features and what products will help them achieve that. And what you've, for all intents and purposes, done is created a framework where you've aligned your customers' needs alongside what you're able to do and help them achieve. Then what you do is once you've created all of that information, so this is all your research, yeah, you've not got to the messaging, you then put yourself aside and think, okay, what are the categories of information I can create? So are there themes that are based around pains and I should focus on? So you start creating lists of different things that you've listed and wrote down, and you start putting them into different sections. And I've done this in an office environment. I've done it online, working remotely. It's great when you're doing it in person because you can have a wall and have all these post-it notes everywhere. The same thing can be done online using Miro or whatever other tool you want to use. And it's great because then you can start building out these funnels of saying, okay, this is a particular thing I need to talk about. And then start creating messaging around it. And the best part is when you've created all of that information, you've pretty much added the vocabulary you need as well into your framework. So then you'll find it easier to write messaging and you'll ensure that you don't miss. And what you end up doing is you start talking about the value rather than the product because you've looked at all of what I've just mentioned, the pains, everything, you've looked at that. And now you're talking about how you can help them and position for that requirement. And I think I use that process. Another thing you could add to that is use case mapping. So this is really good when you're working with a product team where you can ask them, okay, what are they going to use it for? What are these features going to enable them to do? What's it not going to do? So so that when you write your messaging, you ensure that you're positioning towards what it will enable them to do, and you ensure that you're not positioning the product incorrectly as well. So use case mapping is another good tool to use in that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super interesting, especially the fact that you approach it with the user persona, buyer persona. That's something that I do as well. But obviously, as conversion copywriter, I focus a bit more on the buyer persona. So I was wondering, do you duplicate the whole process for user personas then, or are they kind of integrated?
Yeah, so when I create the personas, I always try and create two personas. But when I create the value proposition canvas, I'll always create for an industry or for a particular sector, because or a certain department, depending on what your audience is and how you self-segment. But I'll create it on that. I won't create the value proposition for individual personas. So persona in itself is on its own, but then you can pull that information into the wider value proposition canvas.
Yeah, very interesting. When it comes to, you mentioned the value, right? Value messaging rather than being feature based. I think that in order to get value, it's also important to get the internal perspective from other members of the team, but it's also especially important to hear your customers and your audience. So I was wondering, what are ways that you actually collect some of that value language?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's putting empathy in messaging. And in order to do that, you need to share experiences by stepping into the shoes of the customer to potentially refine your messaging, explore how the customer explains things. And one of the things I've found really interesting, and some agree to it and some don't, is when I interview a customer, I will make notes when I see them feeling frustrated, and I will make notes when I see them really joyous and motivated. People will ask, why are you doing that? Why not just making notes throughout? Nowadays, you can just record the whole session and get it transcribed, right? So why do it? What it allows you to do is really focus on the customer when they're speaking to you so that you can then ask them prompt questions. If you're busy writing notes throughout a conversation, you're not giving them the time. Whereas if you're really speaking to them and having that conversation like we are right now, you're not taking notes. You're having a discussion. You're having a conversation. So they are more receptive to you and they'll be a lot more open to you because they can see that you're trying to understand them. They'll see your facial expressions. You will see their facial expressions. And sometimes the conversation is looks at people, how people are interacting. So it's always important that you have that rapport with the audience that you're speaking to, because they may delve into a pain point and then you can ask them a prompt question and then ask them another prompt question. And you may end up with a proof point that is really valuable. They'll tell you that it saved them X amount of hours, or it saved them this amount of money, or it saved them this amount of resource, which is gold, especially when you're from a product perspective or a marketing perspective. You want to delve and really understand how you're resolving that issue. So I always find that, have a conversation rather than just asking question, taking notes, asking question, taking notes, because it really helps build that rapport. And then to the second, you have an audience internally, your sales team, your customer success team, your product team, your solutions engineers. They are speaking to customers day in, day out. They understand certain pain points and they speak to them, they understand what they're trying to achieve. So use that audience, especially from a product marketing perspective. I always say it's, unless you've got a massive product marketing team, it's a very lonely department because you'll either be one or two of you working with a whole different audience. You're not really a part of a department, even though you are. So for example, I'm part of marketing, but you're always speaking to different people. As at the moment, for example, I'm a solo per PM, but I work with the marketing team, the sales team, the customer success team, solutions engineers, implementation, and you're trying to understand everyone's perspective and understand their exposure to the customer and bring that information in. So yeah, I think it's really a great way of understanding the customer and delving deeper into how you can create that messaging that will resonate with your audience. So two perspectives there.
Very interesting. Love it. When it comes to research, so all of this research that you do, a lot of companies that I see, they might struggle sometimes to get budget for research. So I was wondering, what are ways maybe that you have to persuade and get buy-in from other members of the team or from the executive team in order to conduct all this research? Because it's a lot, right?
Yeah, no, research can be costly, especially when you want to get opinions of, multiple people from a different set of audience. What I'm trying to do is try and create a smaller segment of people that you want to speak to, and then go out and get that information yourself first. For example, if I wanted to interview a CIO, you could reach out to CIOs online through LinkedIn, through various different means, and maybe speak to 1, 2, 3 and collect that information so that you've got a good understanding of what you're trying to achieve based on what you want the research to lead to. What that will give you is the information to then create a business case for that research. So you can then go to your CMO or your finance department and then say, look, I spoke to the audience. This is the information I've collected. I want to create a wider perspective of this. I think it will be really valuable because it'll help us achieve a certain goal, whether that's better messaging, really getting deeper into what the audience is trying to achieve, maybe even creating thought leadership content or just data that belongs to you and research that belongs to you is really important. So creating that business case rather than just feeling deflated by, going out and not getting that budget, work around it. Try and get it from a smaller audience and then build out that business case for it.
Yeah. And be willing to bet that it's going to be good for your career for sure, because you're showing that you care both about customers and also about the company, right? With initiative.
Yeah. One of the things a director told me very early on is remember that where there's a revenue attached, where there's companies trying to achieve an objective, where there's a KPI, always try and align yourself to that KPI because it will help you strategically. It will also ensure that you're aligned to the wider goal of the organization. It'll ensure that you're trying to meet the common objective that your department or your organization has. It's something that I learned very early on, and I've always held that in my mind as to when I start a project, is this going to help achieve something? Is what I'm going to do really going to help the organization or what I'm trying to achieve? And if it isn't, then think twice about doing it before you go on and start the project.
Yeah, very good advice. I would say let's switch to AI. I know that you've been using AI quite a lot, right? For your processes, messaging, product, marketing. Can you walk us through some of your systems and how you do it and the tools maybe?
Yeah. First of all, it was about 6 to 8 months ago, I was skeptical of AI. I was like a former VP of product management told me that I was trying to recruit product marketers for my team and we didn't have budget. And he was like, use ChatGPT, it'll help you do it. And I was really frustrated by it. I was like, you can't replace a person, right? You can't, a product marketer has this skill set and you can't replace that. And you can't replace a content marketer. So I was like really frustrated about it. But when I started to delve deeper into it, I realized that what I'm using it for is not messaging. What I'm using it for is not telling you to write the content for me. What I'm really doing is trying to use it from a perspective like I don't miss a beat. I'm making sure that I really understand the audience, or I'm trying to save resource at a certain point so that I can move the project faster. And I totally accept it. I even emailed him and said, I totally apologize. I've started to use AI and I hold my hands up that it can be used. I'm not saying it will replace product marketing or content marketing. What I'm saying is it will help you. And a couple of things I use it for. One is to build buyer personas. And two, I also use it when I am doing value proposition canvases. So I'll use both a external perspective by speaking to, as I've explained, to the sales team, to the customers. I'll use it from that perspective. But I also want to get a more wider view. And I think AI will help, it allows you to do that. But one of the most important ways to use AI is to make sure you prime the AI before you start using it. So, for example, give it the guardrails to keep within a certain perspective. Otherwise, it'll go rogue. So if you want to make sure, if you want to understand a particular audience, say you're speaking to, for example, if I was to create a persona for example, I work in the edtech, was to create a persona for example, I would say higher education industry or colleges and universities, and then go into what you're trying to achieve, position to some extent what your, for example, communications or resource, whatever you want to talk about, start building that prime. And then at the end of it, say, give the AI the guardrails to talk from, to say, here's the background. Now I'm going to ask you questions, confirm that you understand it. And then you begin asking the questions. And then it's just, for me, it's 4 steps. I ask it, what are the challenges? What are the pain points? What are their jobs and responsibilities? And what are their common objectives? And it will pull this information out. And I was totally surprised when I started really doing it, that how aligned it is and how to some extent very accurate. And what I usually do is I'll build out persona based on working with AI, but then I'll refine and refine. I'll take it to the sales team. I'll take it to the customer success team. I'll ask them to review it and say, what's missing? And I'll add those points. But what it allows you to do is start from a very good structure. And what you can do is validate it refine it, validate it, refine it. And then eventually you can even take that to your final buyer persona and ask them to confirm that this is correct. But what you've done is you've started from a very good, how would I say, base to begin with. Rather than just being a blank piece of paper, you've started from a really detailed description. And to me, I've used it over and over again and built out personas and used it when I was doing value proposition canvases. But there are tools out there. For example, I use copy.ai as well, where not only can you prime it, you can also upload your buyer personas, you can upload content, you can upload your messaging framework. And then, for example, you want to write a 3-touch campaign for lead gen or for a webinar or whatever, you can even ask it to create that copy. But then again, once you've got that copy for those 3-touch campaigns, refine it, make sure it's aligned to the messaging that you're trying to reach out to, and make sure that it's aligned to your organization's messaging. And also that the tone of voice is in line with what your tone of voice is as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I love this.
Use AI, and especially from a solo PMM perspective, where we're working with multiple product marketers, with a big sales team, with a marketing team, customer success. You've got so many things that you're trying to handle. It's really supportive in enabling your workload.
Yeah. Yeah. One good definition of AI that I've heard that I also stand by is that it's a good tool for thought. But on the other hand, which is why I agree with you in having it, like refining it and also checking in with other people in the company. It's a good tool for thought, but you have to be careful not to have it think too much for you, because otherwise you become lazy. Otherwise you stop learning, and that's not something you want to happen.
You should never rely on it to do your work. What you should rely on it is to augment and support you in delivering your objectives. So you're not asking it to do the work, you're asking it to support you. And I read a very good example the other day where someone explained that when they were talking about AI, one of our audiences was saying, it's like Tony Stark, right? He wants to help the world, but he uses the Iron Man suit to enable him to do that. Without Tony Stark, the Iron Man suit isn't going to work. And vice versa, he uses the Iron Man suit to enable him and augment his requirements. Perhaps think of it from that perspective.
Very good analogy.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Super interesting. All right. So last couple of questions. I'm curious, what's your biggest challenge right now when it comes to your job, product marketing? And if you were advise someone to solve it, what would you tell them?
I would say for me, the biggest challenge is, and it's less a challenge and more of a personal weakness. And I'm quite open about this, is always leave room for learning and always think you've not achieved your ceiling, you've not got to the ceiling, because there's always room to learn. And I do it in my messaging. For example, I've always said, write like you speak, because no one wants to hear a telephone voice or no one wants to read a telephone voice. But sometimes when you get into the process and you become ingrained in your work, you become siloed and you'll end up creating what you're trying to stop from doing, you end up doing. So always step back and leave room to look. And sometimes when you're rushing things and when you're doing things, you fail to do that, but always come back and do it again. And there's a thing I learned I attended a product marketing event recently, and I spoke to this messaging strategist, and they told me that one of the best things you can do is take your messaging and then think about it and say, how would you explain that if you were at a barbecue and you were talking to your audience? Say you were at a barbecue and you're talking to a CIO. How would you talk about your product? You wouldn't say certain words, right? Cutting edge. You wouldn't say those jargon words. Just explain it how you would say it. Yeah. And suddenly you'll start talking about it from a perspective, and you'll really focusing those particular pain points, and you'll get to the bottom of it, and you'll reduce the word count. And yeah, I think that was something I learned, only just at the end of last year. And I've started to think about it and going back to my messaging and thinking, okay, I need to change that, or that doesn't resonate, or there's a flaw in my own messaging. So always be self-critical. Yeah. And then another thing I've recently learned is, if you can take another product from a different industry and put it into your messaging. And if that messaging resonates for that product, then you're not really explaining your product efficiently, right? So you want to say, for example, if you're talking about a CRM and then you're talking about a marketing automation platform, but both the wording sounds the same, you need to go back to the drawing board because you've not explained it properly. So it's always trying to think outside of your audience as well to make sure you're not positioning, because if you do that, then your customer won't understand what you're trying to position yourself as.
Yeah.
So it's really important to do that. So always be learning. I'm a big believer of that. And yeah, just even though I've got a process, I'm always trying to refine that process every time.
Yeah. Speaking of learning, where do you go to learn? What's your strategy for learning?
3 steps. I listen to podcasts. I want to hear other people's perspectives. I like to, outside of work, it gives you the opportunity to think of and keep, when you're outside of the work environment, it allows you to absorb that information. Another one is I find certain books very helpful, and there are particular books that I've read once, twice, 3 times. One of the ones I always say to people is Play Bigger. It talks about category creation. I'm always telling people to read that book. There's the other book is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. It keeps you thinking. And then the other one is Product Marketing Alliance. I'm a big advocate of the Product Marketing Alliance. It has over 25 to 30,000 members across the world. I'm close to the team. I've taken the Product Marketing Core certification, and they have really good content and really good templates and structure that they have. Plus, it's access to the community. Because as I've explained, product marketing, if you're a solo PMM, is a very lonely department.
Yeah.
But working with Product Marketing Alliance and their community, I've got access to 25, 30,000 product marketers, and I can reach out to them and get their perspective. So it's always nice to have that exposure as well.
Yeah, for sure. I have one last couple of questions, which is a bit more personal, maybe. You said something I saw online on LinkedIn, I think. You said something like introverts are the new Jedis. Do you remember what that was? And what did you mean by that? Because I'm a super huge introvert. I don't know if you ever done personality typing. I'm a INFJ, so pretty big introvert, but at the same time try to externalize my feelings with people. And I'm super interested in personality typing. So yeah, what's your perspective on that? What's a Jedi introvert?
I'm trying to remember, but I think my main thought around that was, especially with over the last few years, over the pandemic, what you found is introverts have found their feet a lot more. And there's ability, for example, you go into a meeting, an introvert won't necessarily be the one who will talk first or be the one who's most open. But what they're doing is they're absorbing the information. They're taking that information in and they're thinking and they're thinking and they're thinking before they make that comment. So in my perspective, what they're doing is really understanding before their opinion. And I think it's similar to what I do as a product marketer, which is I'm understanding the audience and then bringing out the messaging rather than just blurting it out and writing what I think is right. I'm really going deep into understanding it. And that's what I think that was the main thing I was trying to put across, is that introverts have been doing that for years. And as the pandemic has taken place and everyone went working from home and dialing into Zoom calls, they've been doing exactly the same, but they've been able to put their notes and take that information and look at the recordings and go back and write that information and pull that content together. So they've got a lot more structure around portraying their views as to what they had before. So I think that's something that I've always said, and I've always felt like I was an introvert, and to some extent, I still think I am. I am still trying to get over some of the weaknesses, which is I've always had that anxiety over speaking, public speaking, but I try and get over that by putting myself in that position. Like today, a year ago or 2 years ago, I would not have agreed to talking on a podcast, but here I am today. So it's trying to put yourself in a position. Yeah. And it's that reluctance and that you might say something wrong, but at the end of the day, it's an opinion that you've got. Yeah. You might not be right. You might be wrong. It's your opinion, and your opinion matters. So it's always important to do that. Yeah, I think that, and it does help that I love Star Wars and I wanted to align it to something I love.
So,
So,
yeah, so you could say that if introverts are the new Jedis, empathy is the new force, right?
you got it in one. Let's write that down and use that.
Yes,
Yeah, empathy
exactly.
is the new force. Yeah,
Yeah.
really getting to the bottom of it and understanding it. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Nizam. It's been great. Where can people find you? On LinkedIn, Nizam Yusuf?
Yeah, you'll
or
find me
where
on
else?
LinkedIn. Yeah, you'll find me on LinkedIn. I like to talk about product marketing. I'm always talking about the growth concept and growth mind. And yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite open. What I do like to do is help people who are thinking about product marketing and have a bit of reluctancy. If you're thinking about career in product marketing, reach out. And yeah, I'm an open book. I'll help you understand and perhaps give you ways of getting into product marketing. It's a very small audience, product marketing, and I'm doing my bit to help grow product marketing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been great. And we'll speak soon.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the pod. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, the best thing you could do to support the show and help me as a small business owner would be to leave a review. Head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and let me know what you think. If you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe, and if you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, just hit me up on LinkedIn at Christopher Silvestri or Twitter at SilvestriChris. Speak to you next time.